Tonight's presentations are going to be no different from last night. They will be dynamic, they will be challenging, they will be inspiring. They are thoroughly researched, meticulously organized, and I would be proud myself to stand behind any of these pieces of work. And the first one we're going to talk about, or we're going to see tonight, is extremely interesting. It's Morgan Marzano, her work on, how do I put this? It's an extremely involved work of scholarship. It contains elements of sociological theory, cultural criticism, French theoretical philosophy, SelfCare philosophy, applied philosophy and ethics. It's an extraordinary document Morgan has put together for her MA thesis. It also includes several, how would I say it? It also shows Morgan's interest in activism, in actually bringing forth a sense of where yoga can go from here. And this is what Morgan's thesis really does very well. It explains the dangers that are facing yoga and where they come from, and posits how we can actually, see yoga again in a new way, not a way that asks us to go back to some golden age, but a way that in fact integrates yoga with our modern Western perspectives and what we take to be a truly open society. So with that barest of hints about what Morgan is going to talk about, let me hand it over to her, and I really hope you enjoy this wonderful presentation.
Okay, thank you, Dermot, for the nice introduction. I'm just going to share my screen. Give me 1 second. Okay, how's that for everyone? Looks good. Oops, sorry, hold on. There we go. Okay, so good evening, everyone. My name is Morgan Marzano, and I'll be presenting on my thesis research in biopolitical activism within modern yogas, using an intersectional feminist genealogy of yoga counter spaces. Listed here are a couple of the trends that I've encountered in modern yoga that led me to focus on this research. I think most of us could agree with the idea that yoga in our modern American sense is an individual pursuit of healthiness. It's a tool that we use for different forms of self-care, including the escape of stress or pain that leads us to an acquirement of freedom, and that it's centered a lot around bodily perfection and physicality. I use the modern philosophy of French philosopher Michel Foucault to analyze how these topics became so prevalent in yoga. Our agenda for the evening will include trying to define yoga, which is an interesting topic, the development of the yoga body, if you will, including in that some modern yoga research. And then I'll incorporate how I used feminism and dualism to discuss yoga. I'll give you a little bit of a taste of the theoretical theory that I got into in the paper, but a 20-minute presentation could never do it all justice. And then I'll talk about what I did to analyze what I call counter spaces of yoga. So starting off in defining yoga, I did a little bit of a play on words throughout my piece and decided to use a plural version of yoga. I think Chris Chappell is probably rolling over in the Sanskrit world, but I just really wanted to emphasize the fact that it's not easy to define yoga. And a lot of times we hear a lot about authenticity or origin, but really it's constantly evolving. It's malleable, it's rooted in pluralism and multiplicity. It's very complex, and it really doesn't have a single origin or a fixed tradition. Much of my thesis work was devoted to the theory portion and then how I went about applying that. So I'm going to try to highlight some to begin. So we have a lot of visual definitions of yoga that are offered to us in almost all of our regular spaces, right? We've come to know the yoga body as the fit body, if you will. And I'll go on in the presentation referring to the yoga body in reference to kind of the media and imagery's representation of yoga. In this example, we saw that Yoga Journal published 85 magazines between 2009 and 2015. Of those 85, 67 of them were of white females, and 100% of the cover photos showed pictures of people with a thin and fit body type. So I questioned, what does this say about who should, can, and does have access to yoga? The commodification of yoga has been critical to its popularization in the US. It's often criticized, but it's not unusual. Americans are constantly bombarded by visual advertisements within virtually all of our spaces, and it's become a normative part of our life. Although commodification has led yoga to become highly emphasized for its focus on physicality, much more is happening within the practice of yogas than mere vanity and physical vitality. I offer my research as a forecast for the future of yoga as it pertains to accessibility and inclusivity, uncovering the prevalent social pressures upon body image, gender dualism, socioeconomic political inequities, and heteropatriarchal power systems is and will continue to be critical to embracing a non-objectified and exclusive experience of spirituality and acceptance for all bodies. Heteropatriarchy refers to a dominance given to heterosexual males in our culture. My thesis argues that yoga has become so popular within American culture that it now qualifies as a technology of the self, a concept developed by Michel Foucault and confirmed by other yoga scholars like Farah Godrig. I found that yoga, as this technology of the self, is being adapted widely within intersectional feminist communities to foster awareness, encourage activism, and spread the right to wellness. I utilize Foucault's neoliberal theoretical framework to explore applicable ways in which modern forms of yoga are successful in addressing the pathologies of neoliberalism through centering intersectional feminist health, equity, activism. As feminist activist Audre Lorde states, there is no thing as a single issue struggle because we do not live single issue lives. So what is intersectional feminism? When most of us hear the word feminism, we think of a simple concept like women need more rights, which I agree with, but this analysis takes into account a larger structure, social constructs. So as you see on the slide, intersectional feminism is this interconnection of social constructs like gender, class, race, ethnicity, age, education, sexuality, language, culture, physical or mental ability, just to name a few. And as those concepts intersect with the lack of access, disadvantage, inequity, or discrimination. These intersectional feminist communities are among those that are most affected by the formation of the fit and docile yoga body. This is not just found within imagery and media, but it's also found in our own American governing bodies of yoga. For example, the latest survey of yoga in America, which was a combined effort of Yoga Journal and Yoga Alliance, found that the number of American yoga practitioners has increased to over 36 million people in 2016. This is up from the 20.4 million in 2012. And even with this increasing participation, 70% of participants are still women. This survey claims as one of its key findings, the statement, yoga is for everybody. They asserted this by stating that there are more male and older practitioners than ever before. The study omitted any demographic collection or analysis of socioeconomic status, race, ethnicity, religion, education, or other social constructs like discussed here in intersectional feminism when surveying its practitioners. And in doing so, it omitted entire populations from being considered. They reported solely on the age range in a dual representation of gender, splitting gender into male and female. This heinous and revealing omission leads me to the critical analysis of yogas within intersectional feminism, as it is so clearly being underrepresented. Before I move ahead to the next slide, I wanted to discuss verbally a term and concept that I'll use for the analysis called neoliberalism. It's this power, this system of power, that keeps this underrepresentation of intersectional discriminations occurring. It keeps it going. Yoga scholar Andrea Jain offers one of the best explanations of neoliberal governmentality that I've found so far. She states, this is good, so you better listen. Whichever area of religion or culture one studies, be it so-called spiritual but not religious, or the religiously affiliated, will likely uncover the assumption that a person is entitled to as great a share of the world's resources as that person's money can buy. And in turn, the needs of capital largely determine the priorities of respective disciplines, discourses, and institutions, that they reproduce inequalities, exclude the majority of the population, especially from positions of power, and produce surplus value for the privileged, often white, heteropatriarchal minority. Understanding neoliberalism engages the recognition of the prevalence of the idealized yoga body image and the attachments of capitalistic self-care culture. Within neoliberalism, we have driving forces, the things that keeps it moving. These are these three topics: biopolitics, biopower, and docile bodies. So biopolitics is not always overtly recognized. It's a collective thriving for life. It's how we go about calculating, interpreting, and predicting the overall health of our society or population. Within this overarching theme, we have biopower, which is a soft power. It endeavors to administer, optimize, and multiply through precise controls and comprehensive regulation. All of these depend heavily on the idea of health standardization of populations. Foucault notes the parallel with the rise of measurements and common metrics of human vitality, such as birth rates, death rates, fertility rates, economic and poverty statistics, infant mortality, average longevity, and disease, are used to calculate, interpret, and predict the overall health of society writ large. Political scholars Vernon Chisney and Nicole Namorar state that biopower represents, quote, power in the service of vitality, and it is the adjustment of phenomena of population to economic processes. Therefore, our own bodies, become political and economic vessels. They contribute to these forms of political government, and in turn, they formulate us into docile bodies. Docile bodies make sure that we're self-governed. We accept health inequities as natural facts. We strive to idealize a particular body type, and we participate in individual health in a way that we think that somehow fixing us will translate to the better health of our community. When yoga aligns itself with idealized health standards and encourages capitalistic self-care, participants become docile bodies. I was a docile body before I came to the master's program. Docile bodies are facilitated by the accepted norms or facts surrounding, among other things, all of those health metrics of humanity. So how does this integrate into ways we know and teach yoga today? The concept of dualism transcends into many layers of our existence. It exists in our most basic conceptions, like spiritual or natural, mind or body, male or female. We've inherited these dualisms as truth. We consider them to be truthful, and they come from long-standing, strong and present traditions, like the dualism of Greek philosophy, the colonization of Christianity, the influence and work of René Descartes, and the immeasurable standardization of the scientific method. The mind-body dualism is oftentimes superimposed upon the teaching, rhetoric, and branding in modern yoga spaces in the form of a mind-body dualism. This mind-body dualism contends that one's spirit and body are separable. It centers the individual subject, their mind, and their body as the pivotal endeavor of soteriological inquiry. Spiritual inquiry is then isolated just to the individual, and we're left with no concept or concern of how to relate to the rest of the world, let alone be concerned about the rest of the world. This superimposition is a construct of neoliberal heteropatriarchy. Next, I'm going to explore how neoliberal agendas have had some success in creating docile bodies through the industry giants of self-care and self-help. I'd like to offer a new definition of self-care. Last night we heard from Grace and she showed some really good Instagram photos of exactly what I'm going to talk about for how we've come to know self-care. It's become this self-serving, I'm going to take a bubble bath and the rest of my community will then be healthy. I might be exaggerating, but that's kind of what it's turning into. So I offer a different definition here on the left by Lynn Chu. She's a human rights activist. She says that self-care is learning how to live our lives in a way that we are mindful of how we are, knowing ourselves in a way that's holistic, mentally, physically, spiritually, in our relationships and emotions. It's understanding that the personal and the political are together. The personal has to be mindful of the collective, and the collective has to be mindful of the individual. Given this idea of self-care, I state that yoga teachings that omit positioning self-care as a service to our greater communities are further distancing us from one another. And I don't think that's really what anybody wants. So what I did was 8 different yoga studio case studies for the analyzation of a counter space in a yoga studio. Counter spaces are contrary to what we find in most corporate or affluent yoga studios, and these counter spaces they're actively seeking to expose and dismantle, using the teachings of yoga, a lot of the neoliberal concepts that we talked about before, specific to docile bodies. The counter spaces, their individual facilitators and greater communities are questioning the values and expectations surrounding neoliberal spirituality, and by doing so, counteracting the formation of docile bodies. Listed below are the commonalities that I found within the 8 studios that I studied. All of them had missions that focused upon health equity and social justice. They even went about, like Tree Yoga South here in Los Angeles, surveyed over 6,000 of its own students to include demographics that we saw were omitted from the Yoga in America survey, things like race and gender. So not only surveying students, but also publishing the statistics up publicly on their website, and also publishing articles and books, which we see across almost all of the studios, talking about what they're doing, getting out into the community. They also involve themselves in community partnerships like Yoganic Flow Yoga Studio in Detroit, Michigan, where the owner had a specific business development plan that strategically placed her yoga studio in an area that bridged 2 communities that had been gapped by the ideas of race, class, gender, socioeconomic status. And through this, she was able to start offering a community yoga class in a park space. And this park was previously notorious for being unsafe and no one would gather there. And in the interview that I collected with her, it transformed the park space from a docile space into a thriving community space using the practice of yoga. Other factors that were prevalent in a lot of the counter yoga space studios were the offering of bilingual and culturally relevant music class offerings, right, relating to the cultures in your community. They defined self-care, connecting it to the community. They dismantled the exclusive fit yoga body by offering classes and styles that were like for curvy bodies and all bodies. And then I also did an analysis with Jacoby Ballard and Lindsay Danis, who both published articles concerning the LGBTQ, that would be the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, or questioning community within yoga spaces. They discussed their experiences with yoga at first being isolating and not feeling welcome, being the only one, and transformed that experience, as we saw across almost all of the counter space examples that I give. They transformed their experience into activism. They started up their own community classes specific to the LGBTQ community and incorporate the celebration of all bodies. They published articles about their activism relating to the health effects that pertain specifically to their community concerning ideal body image. And they really emphasized the idea that non-gendered language should be used in teaching pedagogy, rather than referring to men might do a pose this way or women might feel more comfortable this way. They really critiqued the idea that in an inclusive space should refrain from using gendered language as to not isolate certain individuals. The next case study that I did was of several different Instagram accounts. And just to qualify Instagram as a prevalent space, 500 million people use Instagram every day. It's the most popular traditional social network among teens, which is really important when we remember what type of social constructs and influence and body image that teens are getting using this so much, right? And 62% of yoga teachers and studios use social media to promote their yoga offerings. So yoga is all over Instagram. So what happens when we combine messages of feminist body positivity on Instagram? I used a study that found that a woman's ability is strengthened and able to reject cultural standards of beauty and experiences of sexual objectification when she has a foundation in feminism. That it helps maintain interpersonal experiences as opposed to how she physically looks on the outside. It's, people that have feminist ideals are less likely to report body image disturbance, and it helps moderate the relationship between media awareness, knowledge of the thin ideal as presented by media, and an internalization of that thin ideal. The major findings that I concluded with on Instagram, looking at several different accounts, were the IDs listed here on the right. For example, I used Jessamine Stanley and Valerie Shugren, and they became Instagram body positivity activists in this space. They use yoga as their platform to talk about health equality, neoliberal agendas, anti-discrimination, non-gender conforming dualisms, body positivity, fat phobia, social justice, and inclusivity that moves beyond just labeling an institution inclusive. Their topics in feminism expand into female health and affirm sexually oppressed and non-heteronormative groups of people. They celebrate all of their bodies. Their post contents consists of messaging like, stop assuming someone's health is based on the way that their body looks. And another one said, you are not just alive to lose weight and pay bills. They openly address fat shame or fat phobia in American culture. Stanley is quoted stating that fat has become synonymous with being, she says, dumb, unworthy, ugly, or lazy. It's almost like profanity, she says. She makes it a part of her mission to address this with the repeated use of the word fat in an effort to reclaim the word that she believes is undeserving of its negative attributes. These women also have published many books, hold workshops, and attend community events in universities giving body positivity presentations. Jessamine is an intersectional feminist advocate, and she celebrates herself regularly, self-proclaimed as, quote, Black, queer, fat, femme, body positivity activist, and wellness expert. She also produces regular podcasts to further act within her community and spread her message, and is constantly offering ways to re-educate her yoga community. Commonalities in all of these messages include the idea that yoga is becoming this platform where we can reassess how we're looking at body image. What are we saying a yoga body is really indicative of who we invite into the practice, who is able to make it into the yoga studio. And they're sending a really different message than what the media has been sending for a long time. So with this, I bring up some conclusions. I kept it brief so that I could give you guys the floor if you had any questions. I couldn't get to everything, even though I wanted to. So within my thesis, I offered appendices, 3 different appendix on how to analyze your own yoga space and your own yoga teachings to become more inclusive and accessible. And I also discuss a potential remedy to the mind-body dualism, offering the application of Samkhya yoga. That's a different type of dualism that does not isolate and depoliticize individuals. Our modern context of yoga, we have to recognize the effects of neoliberal governmentality in our capitalistic culture if we wish to create spaces and teachings that do not isolate for the discrimination of the majority of the population. now I open it up to you for your questions.
Thank you so much, Morgan. That was an extraordinary compression of the work. Extremely well done. We have a question straight up about COVID-19.
This is Chris, and I am wondering how you see the current COVID-19 crisis in light of your studies, and how maybe what you have analyzed could help yoga redress some of the injustices that are rampant right now.
I so agree, Chris. Thank you for the question too. I really wanted to open or close with a kind of a recognition of what we're going through. It was fascinating in my research to see this, you know, the virus comes into our population with no discrimination, right? It covers all bodies. It doesn't discriminate between the rich or the poor or race or anything like that. And the idea of what it might do to expand our knowledge and our acceptance of one another, what it could do when we reflect on in our yoga practice about how we're really not that separate and how we do apply so many constructs to divide ourselves. That yoga can really be a practice for finding voice in advocacy, for a healing from that kind of detrimental separation.
Thank you.
May I ask a question, Dermot?
Sure, yeah, please.
Morgan, I just want to congratulate you. I'm so impressed by the way that you handled such difficult critical theory. This is stuff that is not easy to read, and it's also not easy to just apply. And I think part of your thesis process was really grappling through very difficult material that actually offers quite a lot to the conversation of modern yoga. And I think what's important that you pointed out here is that yoga is never really devoid of context. And Andrea Jane, I think in the same source that you're citing here, mentioned recently that we can no longer afford to ignore the neoliberal contexts in which yoga is operating. For those of us who study religion and yoga and so on and so forth, because it's so pervasive. As you recall from one of the articles we read in the modern yoga class, it's become such a part of the fabric of our life that we don't even realize that we're living in it anymore. And so I just want to thank you for, I don't know how you did that, but so sincerely and carefully laying out that some of the key issues for us. And I really look forward to seeing where you take this in the future. So thank you, Morgan.
Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it.
And I think we all want to know, what is the cathedral behind you, and where in the world is Carmen Sandiego?
Morgan Sandiego is, I'm in Syracuse, my hometown, and behind me is, it's a church. I haven't been in it. I think it's a basilica, maybe a Polish church. There's different kind of church, cultural associated churches around Syracuse, and they're really, really nice construction. It gets all lit up at night. I don't know if you can see.
Yeah, that's great.
So we have a couple more questions, Morgan, if you want to field. One about your thoughts on body neutrality versus body positivity. And also, could you elaborate on the recommendations a little bit?
Yes. Okay, so body neutrality versus body positivity. I think body positivity is the movement that I found most often referred to in these discussions. And I applied it lightly with the idea that I feel that to break out of the mold that we see so many people working towards fitting themselves into, right? The things that we do to ourselves to modify our bodies that make us buy cosmetics or go to this appointment or that appointment. think every time we go to eat about the food that we want. I think that in order to combat some of the extreme negativity that we have around body image, just inherited, sometimes we don't even see it. We don't even know that we're doing it. We don't even know that we're thinking. Women most often think all day, every day about what they're eating and how it's going to affect their body. They're never free from it. So I think in some sense, I agree with body neutrality once we've gotten to the point where we can really appreciate our bodies first. And I think that comes with a bit more positivity in the beginning. But I think getting to a place of neutrality is a sought after goal. As for some of the integrative features that I put, so I made a whole appendix for whoever the question's from, and I'm happy to send it to you. And it lists out in the form, I did a lot of questions. So I said, how is your space branding itself on the internet? What types of mission statements do you put out? Who are you calling to in your business? What kinds of facts and questions are you answering that help people who might be scared or feel that yoga isn't as approachable? So I would be happy to send that to you. I think in general, the basics 4 that I found were integrating a holistic sense of self-care, get it down to people's head that self-care is only about me, right? Second would be find a better discussion for dualism that doesn't separate the individual from the rest of their community. The third would be the incorporation of a body positivity, or however you want to go about that, love and appreciation of the body. And the fourth would be the removal of gendered language in yoga classes that will, you never know who is in your class and how they might be thinking, or how they might react to the effects of hearing men or women and having to choose or think about what's happening. Even not choosing, you know, it's isolating. So those would be the top 4, but I can send you the whole document for sure.
You know, there's actually, this discussion really could go on and on because there's so much rich material here. But we do have several more questions, but I think in the interest of time for the other students, we might have to move on. But I'm sure this conversation can keep going. It's very relevant. It's very important. And I think Professor Miller really hit the nail on the head. To understand this book goals material is one thing, but to apply it in a way that illuminates the discussion is a wonderful achievement. Of course, I speak as an ex-philosopher, maybe still at heart one, but very, very happy and very impressed with the way you handle this material. So congratulations.
So much, and thank you
Morgan.
for your questions and your time.
We are going to dedicate the superlative of Shakti to Morgan Marzano, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a moment. But in tribute to Morgan and to Shakti, what I want to do is have us look here on the screen at the elements. We have all 5 of the elements. So we have earth, we see the palm tree, and there's some beach sand down there. There's some water in the background. We all wish we could be on this beach right now with me, don't you? There's the sunlight coming in from above. And then there's also the air. You can see the air moving the palm trees and the great expanse of the sky above. So Morgan, you'll see why, but I want to dedicate the superlative Shakti to you. And to start to do that, I'm going to chant the Devi mantra to you one time. This is your mantra. And Chris Chappell and Maureen Chappell and Charlotte and anyone else who knows it from Hill Street, the short piece of the Devi mantra, you can chant it with me, okay? So here we go, 1, 2, 3. Ya Devi Sarva Bhuteshu Shakti Namaste, 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 Namo Namaha. Thank you for joining me in that, everyone. Okay, so Morgan, I'm going to just quickly read a translation of it for you, and then a little dedication to you. Oh, great goddess, abiding in all things with the form of Shakti, we pay homage to you again and again. You've brought a tremendous amount of courage and fierce, radiant compassion to us all. Your energy levels and ability to juggle so many tasks at once and yet somehow complete them all leaves us bewildered. In the graduate classroom, you've given us critical insights and demonstrated a willingness to engage difficult theoretical material in your research. Even more inspiring, you've courageously deployed your new insights to speak much needed new truths to deep-rooted power outside the classroom. And I think your research is a great example of that. Your willingness to engage modern yoga critically on so many different levels has set a good example for future generations of yoga studies scholars. I would like to therefore hereby bestow you, Morgan Marzano, with the superlative Shakti for the limitless energy, strength, and power that you hold and continue to share with us all. So thank you, Morgan, for being who you are and all that you've contributed to the program and to the classroom. I'll never forget some of our interactions in the classroom and in office hours, and how incredibly, how incredibly powerful of a human being you really are, and your willingness to take risks and look at things that are difficult to look at and that are challenging, both personally and from an academic standpoint. I'll miss you.
Chris, thank you so much. That was, I'm gonna cry. It means a lot to me to hear all of what you just said. I'm sorry. I feel really honored to receive the Shakti award. I feel it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, especially Dr. Walsh, for all of your guidance these last couple of weeks. Really helped me keep it together and stay on track, and in a really really nice way. So it was warming, and it made my process a lot really nice. So thank you, and thank you to everyone, all the faculty, all the staff. I loved my job working for the program, and I'm gonna miss everybody, and just thank you so much. I can't thank everyone enough. Thank you.
Congratulations, Morgan.